Keeping your business healthy in today's marketplace can be a challenging and overwhelming task. From the threat of litigation inside and outside your organization and the inefficiencies that can rob your bottom line as a result of unproven marketing programs, the deck can be stacked against you. To get ahead of these challenges and stay ahead of your competition, the Bottled Business Sense Show provides practical business solutions that uniquely emphasize key legal principles, management techniques, and marketing strategies to protect and ensure the longevity of your business. You'll learn how to implement marketing and protection principles equal to those used by today's most successful corporations. Join your hosts Bill Bernard, Rick Moscoso, and Steve Smith for some high-energy discussion that will inspire you to take control of your business so it can prosper in today's consistently challenging business environment.
Well, good morning, everyone. Here we are again Tuesday morning here on the Bottled Business Sense Show. I'm Rick Moscoso, one of your hosts for today's episode, and wanted to welcome everyone here to the show. We are a show that offers information, tips to small business owners, both from a legal perspective as well as marketing and video marketing perspective. And here today joining me are my two expert cohorts, Mr. Bill Bernard and Mr. Steve Smith. So I'd like to say hello to them before we start the show. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great, Rick. Good to be here on another beautiful day in Southern California. It's the temperatures are mild, and it looks like we're blessed to be able to have a Thanksgiving coming up here or a Thanksgiving and Christmas season, I should say, that is going to be very mild, I hope, and enjoyable. And with that, how are you doing, Mr. Smith? I understand you've got a bit of a cold today.
Yeah, I'm doing my best to keep myself upright, which is always a good thing.
But, take that vitamin C. Take that vitamin.
Right, but it's taken its toll on the voice, so I'm gonna have to see if I can get through these shows without sounding too bad. So.
Okay.
Well, as we speak of how our health is today, that's a good segue into the topic that we have to discuss for our small business owners, and that is the Affordable Care Act. Now, gentlemen, from what I understand, there's some new changes coming out next year that all of us small business owners should be aware of. And Bill, why don't you kick it off and share with our audience what those changes may be?
Well, thanks, Rick. I thought obviously this is near and dear to every business owner's heart and has been for the past few years. And I thought that these updates are important and it's worth going over. But before we get into that specifically, we might want to talk a little bit about few foundational issues. And that is this recent case that the Supreme Court ruled on in the summertime, and that is King, K-I-N-G, versus Burwell, B-U-R-W-E-L-L. And this really had to do with the federal exchanges. And to give you a background, the federal government said, okay, we're going to have the Affordable Care Act. This is a very simplistic, straightforward view, and I'm doing this because of our time allotment. But in any event, we are going to develop these exchanges, and we're going to put these federal exchanges, we're going to offer them to every state in the union. Well, of course, a lot of states didn't want it, and you obviously know the battle between Democratic and Republican philosophies. Without getting into that, a lot of states didn't want it, so 16 of the 50 states accepted the exchanges. What happens when you accept an exchange? The government says you can sign up at these exchanges, and in return for accepting our exchanges, Mr. or Mrs. State, whoever you are, we're going to give you subsidies, government subsidies, to help pay for these programs, so that makes it, quote unquote, more affordable and less expensive to people who need insurance and who don't have it presently. So King versus Burwell said that despite the way the law was written, these subsidies can be given to all 50 states because the availability of exchanges are there, and that the subsidies can be provided whether the states decide that they're going to take on these exchanges or not. So now all 50 states have availability to these subsidies. These subsidies, of course, make it less expensive to obtain insurance. And so even if you don't go through a federal exchange, you have the availability now, by way of the Supreme Court decision, to get cheaper insurance because the federal subsidies will apply to all 50 states instead of the initial 16. So that lays the foundation for how it will affect our small business owners, because the employer mandate, which requires employers to provide insurance coverage to employees pursuant to the Act, applies if you have a business with 50 or more employees. So if you have 49 employees or less, you're not forced to having to supply this coverage. And I think this is interesting, because there's always been an argument that it affects our small businesses. Well, I think a lot of our small businesses, by the way, I'm going to throw this out. The U.S. Treasury Department has said that 96% of employers in the United States are small business owners, and that small business owners in large part comprise 49 employees or less. So the argument that has been typically made that this is going to, break providing jobs might have some meat to it if you want to argue about having employees over 50 or more. But our small business owners, many of whom we talk to through this show, are in a position where they have a few employees, or maybe are working independently by themselves. So I think going into 2016, I think that's why it's important to bring some of these issues to the forefront for our viewers and listeners.
Okay, Bill. So if you let's say you run a contracting business, and between the people that you have on staff and the people you might employ to do field work, on a regular basis, maybe overseeing some of the crews in various areas that do things, let's just say you have a staff of 14 people.
Right.
So you clearly go below the 50 minimum. But if you decide you want to do something for the employees you have, what options do you have that might be affordable at that level?
Well, now that gets into something that, to be candid, goes outside of the perspective of the law, in my view. And what I would suggest people do is to simply do one little thing, and that's go see the accountant on their team to see whether it can be put into their budget, Steve. Because, that's a good question from this standpoint. If you're going to look for a job, maybe you're going to say, hey, do you provide insurance coverage? And if so, what kind of coverage do you provide? Well, here's the way it typically happens in the scenario you suggested, Steve. Number one, it's within the budget of the employer, and he wants to do it in order to draw in quality employees, or he provides a plan where he may pay a portion of it and pass the rest of that expense onto the employee. My wife's a good example. She works for a small company, and they pay for a large majority of the insurance, but she pays a little bit out of her check each week in order to have that insurance coverage. So that would be the way you would typically do it. For 2016, I think it's important to point out that companies with more than 100 full-time employees must offer health insurance to at least 70% of their full-time staff. Okay, now that's a little bit of a complicated number, but here's the bottom line that you need to know. If the more employees you get, it affects how many full-time employees are going to get insurance. Because remember, when we say 50 employees or more, you could be looking at maybe less than all full-time employees. So if you have full-time employees, you're going to want to pay attention to that number, because full-time employees is the one that triggers the requirement to provide insurance. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of harsh penalties. And in 2016, it's been projected that businesses are going to grow and want to provide more employees to their business as the economy grows. And so as that happens, that's going to affect the ability of these companies the larger companies to survive, because they're going to have to provide health coverage. But what's interesting here is this whole plan was set in motion to put the burden on the larger companies, because after all, the larger companies with 50 employees or more, and of course the larger you get, the better you are, they're going to be in a position typically to be able to afford to provide this coverage, right? So that's why the government provided a cutoff. What went into their thinking in terms of making the cutoff 49 or less is anyone's guess, or you'd really have to get into the background of the act to figure that out. But the point is, as the company grows and the more employees you get, the idea is the more affordable it's going to be to provide this coverage for your employees, because you're going to be a larger, more secure financially, that is, company or organization.
Let me ask you this. So recently in the news, and I don't know how this affects that 49 and below, but Humana, for example, just announced a loss in their stock value, and now they're reconsidering participating in the ACA. So how do you think that action would affect the smaller business owner in what they consider to do?
Well, I don't really know that would have any direct effect, to be honest with you, Rick. I mean, the small business owner, while it encompasses a large majority, 96%, as the Treasury Department says, of our workforce, I always hear this argument that and I'm not candidly trying to be political here. I'm trying to be as objective as I can, but I keep hearing the argument that this insurance issue will affect those businesses. I don't hear too much about the larger businesses. So if I'm understanding your question correctly, I don't know that what Humana does or any larger company does is really going to affect the small business owner and the 96% of the workforce that small business owners encompass. What I tend to think when I hear these things is that the bigger companies just want a bigger share of the profit and don't want to foot the bill out for providing insurance coverage to employees. And the argument being that, well, now these premiums are going to continue to get more expensive, and that's going to cost us more money. And that may be so, but this is all rooted in the fact that are we going to, as a society, step up to the plate and say, we're going to provide insurance coverage, even though it's going to be a little bit harder on all of us, including our big businesses? Are we going to do that for our population because that's more important than how much of a profit that we make? And that really goes to an idealistic attitude, if you will, that we're either going to come to reach or we're going to continue to battle over for years to come, in my view.
Well, all right. So if a company is exceeding the 50 employee mark,
right,
what are their options in terms of providing insurance that meets the federal guidelines? I mean, do they actually have to have a company that provides a full plan, or can they get away with giving the employee a health insurance premium every month, an amount, $500-600, whatever, and basically say, you go out and find your own insurance?
And are you talking about the companies that are 49 or less?
No, I'm talking about the ones that are 50 and above. 50
or above. Well, they can work it to where they have to provide. If you have full-time employees, for example, companies that have over 50 employees have to provide this insurance by way of the federal mandate. How they structure the insurance in terms of who's going to pay what amount is going to be decided by the company. They can't make it so unaffordable that the employee can't take it on. When you reach a point where you're at 100 employees or more, of full-time employees, then you're going to have to budget it out to where you're going to be able to provide a larger amount of employees, a larger amount of insurance. But the IRS guidelines really cover how much the companies have to provide, or in terms of how much money they have to expend on their employees. I didn't want to really get into that part of it. That's something that I'm not as familiar with, to be quite candid, and the numbers game is not an issue I really want to address in detail. I really would rather address what our employers are going to have to expect in terms of their obligations to provide coverage. What the dollars turn out to be, or what the dollars are going to turn out to be. And I might suggest that there's a handy flow chart that was provided by the government that we might attach to the show template if we can, Rick, and maybe that'll help people. That'll give people a link to go to be able to get into this a little more deeply. But I don't mean to step over your question, Steve. It's just It's just the things I'd like to highlight is that in 2016, you must offer coverage to your full-time staff beginning in 2016 if you're between 50 and 100, or I should say technically 50 and 99 employees, and you must cover the dependents of the full-time employees. So whatever dependents you have must be included in that coverage. That goes a little bit.
All right. So,
but hold it, not your spouse. Interestingly enough, not your spouse. But your dependents must be covered. That's an interesting quirk.
Yeah.
Have you ever gone out on the internet and searched for health insurance coverage as an individual?
I did when I first started my business about 10 years ago. Yes.
Okay. How many different companies and plans did you run into that you had to kind of muddle through in order to figure out which one was right for you?
I would probably say about 5 to 6 or 7, because I had the main names in line. I didn't do such a detailed search that I wanted the cheapest premium. I had like the major guys in line, and then from those major guys, those major companies, I wanted to see who had the best coverage for the best, for the best price.
Well, I've done the same thing, and I went a little deeper, and there's dozens. There may be close to 100 different plans, companies, brokers. I mean, it's amazing. It's almost overwhelming out there. So the thing that I'm not really familiar with is if I have one of those companies that falls into the 50 and above, or even if I have a 30 employee company and I just want to be thought of as a better place to work to attract better employees.
Right.
Do you know what the standard is in terms of, because there's so many variations out there and there's so many individual needs. I'm sure these companies have to figure out where the baseline is that they're going to offer. And for people that need much more than that, at some point they're going to be on their own.
Right. Well, remember that premiums, as we all acknowledge, can differ. I can tell you based on my experience that if I were to provide a premium, if I were to hire 3 people tomorrow and provide them health insurance coverage, it could probably cost me anywhere between $3,000 and $5,000 a month for each employee. And then I'm going to have to decide how much of that I'm going to pay versus how much the employee is going to pay. And again, you have a wider berth when you have 49 or less employees. Once you have 50 or above, well, you can imagine what the employer is now dealing with, because now they're going to have to provide coverage. It's not a question of if I have to, they have to, and how they streamline it in terms of what the employee is going to pay is really going to be decided by several guidelines that go beyond the scope of the show. I think the important part of this show is to point out that coverage must be provided. It must be provided to dependents, and it must have coverage that covers pre-existing conditions. And in 2016, this is going to be more prevalent, because I think the real crux of this issue is we have a country now that has small businesses. 96% of employers are small businesses in this country. Now, how many of those small businesses are going to be faced with the desire to attract employees who want health care coverage, when in fact some of them may not have to provide it at all because they're 49 or below? They're going to be faced with some tough decisions. Now, that's the opposite side of the argument, by the way. The opposite side of the argument has been, well, we won't be able to attract the best employees, and our business is going to falter because we're not going to be able to afford to provide them health care where they're going to be able to get them at larger companies. So let's look at it this way. There's no happy medium here that we can reach that's going to please everybody. It's a tough decision.
There's some assumptions in there that I would take issue with, and it's only because as an employer, depending on where you are and depending on what your cost of operation is, not everybody makes the same profit margin in the business they are. Some people's businesses are more costly to run because bigger infrastructure is required, and other ones are less costly because of virtue of either the product or service that they provide and how they provide it.
Okay.
So at some point, when you get a business that gets up to that 49-person mark, and they know what it's now going to cost them to step over that line,
right?
Okay, either because what they've been providing their employees has been what they can afford, but may not meet the minimum, or now because at 50 or more, there's a standard about what everybody's going to have to get. I'm going to tell you that most of these people are going to find a way to expand without adding more headcount.
And that's very true, Steve. But also remember that now employees who can't get it with their employers must go and sign up. They're going to have to find their own coverage. And what do you think about this? How does that affect their, let's say they go to a guy who's got 49 or less employees. Let's say they're going to be paid what they believe to be a nice wage. That money is going to be deducted from their wages because they're going to have to go out and get their own insurance. It's a mandate now. You're going to have to go pay for your own insurance.
All right, look at it this way, Bill. What if, as an employer, and I mean, look, I'm not suggesting everybody's going to do this, but when you have this much liability on the line just to be able to run your business,
right?
Okay, how many times do you think people that go interview or put in an application for a job opening, and somehow the employer is either able to determine or suspects that that individual might carry an increased coverage burden because of maybe something that a pre-existing condition that might take their policy numbers up? Do you think it's likely that employers may make decisions that they may not admit to about who they hire based on what they think that person's going to bring to the party in terms of insurance coverage?
Absolutely. Just like I think employers secretly hire people or don't hire people that may be of Asian descent or maybe black or maybe be a woman. I think that happens all the time. I think what's interesting is you are the pre-existing condition issue, by the way, I don't think will raises the premium in any way, shape, or form, because the mandate now says that all insurance has to cover pre-existing conditions. So whatever price is set by insurance companies isn't based anymore on pre-existing conditions per se. It's based on, the Affordable Care Act and what it's going to cost their business, because now it's all equal across the board. Everybody has to cover pre-existing conditions. But to your point, Steve, I think it's interesting. People are always susceptible to prejudice. And if you want to call health care coverage a prejudicial aspect of this whole mix, I think you probably can. It's an interesting concept, and I think our business owners need to be aware that the magic number is 49 or below. That we're talking about covering the majority of your workforce, which is full-time employees, and if you're above that 50 mark, you're going to also have to cover dependents of the employee. So in going forward in 2016, we have this expansion, if you will, of the Affordable Care Act, but what some might consider to be a positive expansion, in the sense that this case has now allowed federal exchanges that provide subsidies to all 50 states, which is geared, if you will, to making insurance more affordable. How that's going to work out in the future, we'll have to see.
I wonder how many businesses out there that already are underneath the 50 mark. I wonder how many out there now are already providing some type of healthcare coverage. And I say that only because here in California, they're constantly talking about, taking the minimum wage up.
Yeah.
And for some jobs, that probably will be a backbreaker for some types of businesses.
Yes.
But when you get businesses that require employees to be educated and have certain skills most of these guys are already beyond this mark anyway. So putting it into law, it doesn't really make a difference to them. So when you look at the insurance clause, I wonder how many businesses that are under the 50 mark have already started offering it, irrespective of how many employees they have.
I think that would be an interesting poll that we should take, just like they take the election polls. I would love to do that. But I know we're running out of time, so let me end the show this way. The interesting philosophical argument here, I think, is I think we depend upon our small businesses to build our country, really the underpinning of our country. And then as they continue to grow, they become the larger businesses, some of them, that now is able to take on the more expensive issues like applying coverage, getting to the 50 employee mark or more. Now, some could always argue even companies between 50 and 100 are small, but the cutoff has to be somewhere. But I think the idea is that the backbone of the country are small business owners, who we always address through this show. And then as they get larger and they grow, if they do at all, as some of them do, obviously, and become bigger and larger companies. I mean, let's face it, Hewlett-Packard was small at one time. Then they are able to take on this expense. Meanwhile, the smaller companies that stay small have the availability of these exchanges with the subsidies available to them to have the employee go out on their own and get it. And that was the idea here, the balancing act, if you will, to try to provide these exchanges in all 50 states. That's the tie-in, to allow an employee who is 49 or under, working for an employer 49 or under, to be able to afford insurance and make that company business as attractable or to be as attractive to that employee as the bigger business who provides the coverage. That really, to me, is what is being attempted here. Again, how it pans out over years to come is what we'll have to see.
All right. Well, great. Bill, thank you very much for this great insight. A lot of changes coming out for 2016 that small business owners need to be aware of. If you have any further questions in regards to this topic, Bill, what's the best way to strike up a discussion with you?
Feel free to give me a call at 949-413-6535 or 949-698-6222. But remember, I'm a lawyer, not an expert on the Affordable Care Act. I'm happy to help anybody who is required to provide. I'm happy to help any employer or employee understand their rights. One of their rights is to have health care coverage, whether it's through an exchange or through their employer, depending on the size of the employer. I'm happy to help them there. Once they get into the intricacies of the Health Care Act, they need to see a health care specialist, and I think that's really the main point I want to pass on. I'm also going to provide a link for the show that provides a handy chart outlining the various penalties for employers who don't accept coverage under the Affordable Care Act in the year 2016, and that'll be really great for our employers to kind of download and just click on and print out, so they'll have an understanding of what their obligations are to their employees.
Well, awesome. That's great information, Bill. Thank you very much for that. Folks, if you want to download that link or access to that link, it'll be right down here below this video, along with all of our contact information. So if you have any further questions, just reach out to us at the contact information below. We are the Bottled Business Sense show here every Tuesday. You can inquire about how to be a guest on the show at bottledbusinesssenseshow@gmail.com or reach out to us on social media, Google+, Facebook, and Twitter at Bottled Business Sense Show. Oh, excuse me, not Twitter. Google Plus and Facebook at Bottled Business Sense Show, and Twitter at BB Sense Show. So, gentlemen, thank you again for a great episode here today. Look forward to seeing you guys again next week. And until then, everyone out there that's listening, have a great day, great rest of the week, and we'll see you again on our next episode next week at 10 a.m. on Tuesday.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Take care, Bill.